Hello everyone and welcome. I'm excited to kick off our presentation today. We'll be exploring how the Federal Reserve influences our economy, specifically how it shapes growth, jobs, and prices through its modern tools. The title of today's talk is Monetary Policy, Steering the U.S. Economy. Over the next few slides, we'll look at how these tools work, why they matter, and what that means for all of us. Let's get started. Congress has charged the Federal Reserve with pursuing three foundational objectives that guide every policy decision. These goals are essential for maintaining a healthy and stable economy. When we talk about the Fed's mandate, we're referring to the specific responsibilities it has been assigned by Congress. Essentially, these are the key areas where the Fed focuses its efforts to promote a strong economy. The first goal is price stability, which means keeping inflation under control so prices don't rise too rapidly. The second is maximum employment, aiming to ensure as many people as possible who want jobs can find them. The third is moderate long-term interest rates, which helps create a stable environment for borrowing and investing. Together, these objectives form the foundation for the Fed's policy decisions. They're all about balancing different economic needs to support overall growth and stability. Understanding these goals helps us see how the Fed influences our daily lives and the broader economy. Let's start with the first key point, keeping inflation at a predictable and low rate. This is really about creating stability in prices so that both consumers and businesses can plan ahead with confidence. When prices don't suddenly jump or drop unexpectedly, it makes it easier for everyone to make decisions about spending, investing, or saving without the fear of disruptive cost changes. Stability in prices is fundamental to a healthy economy. Now, moving on to the second point, maximum employment. This is about achieving the highest sustainable level of employment, meaning as many people who want jobs as possible can find them relatively quickly. The goal here is to avoid overheating the labor market, which can happen if employment gets too tight and wage growth accelerates too rapidly, potentially leading to inflationary pressures. Finally, these two objectives, stable prices and maximum employment, are actually part of what we call the dual mandate. This is Congress's directive to the Federal Reserve, guiding us to balance these two goals. Both are essential for fostering a healthy economy where people can work, save, and invest with confidence, all while keeping inflation in check. This balance is at the heart of our overall mission to promote economic stability and growth. Let's talk about the importance of moderate long-term interest rates. These rates play a crucial role in supporting affordable mortgages, business loans, and government financing. Essentially, they act as the connective tissue of a healthy economy, enabling growth and stability. While many people focus on the dual mandate, aiming for maximum employment and stable prices, it's equally important to keep long-term borrowing costs in check. If these rates are too high, borrowing becomes expensive, which can slow down investment and economic growth. Conversely, if they are too low for too long, it can lead to excessive risk-taking and financial instability. This brings us to our third goal, maintaining moderate long-term interest rates. It's about striking the right balance, preventing rates from becoming either too high or too low, so that the economy can grow sustainably without creating unnecessary risks. This goal is central to the overall theme of promoting a resilient and stable economy. Let's talk about who makes up the key decision-making body in the Federal Reserve System. The Board of Governors consists of up to 7 members, and these members are appointed by the President. Their role is crucial in guiding monetary policy. Along with the board, there are 4 rotating Reserve Bank presidents who participate in meetings, and importantly, the permanent New York Fed president is always at the table. This group, known as the FOMC, meets about 8 times a year. During these meetings, they assess current economic conditions to decide on the appropriate monetary policy stance. Transparency is a core principle here, so all decisions they make are publicly communicated. This openness helps ensure the public and markets understand the rationale behind policy moves, reinforcing trust and stability. So, in essence, the FOMC is the heart of decision-making in the Federal Reserve, bringing together diverse voices and expertise to guide the economy effectively. These three interlocking goals reinforce each other. Stable prices support employment, and moderate rates support both. Keeping borrowing costs within a range that promotes sustainable investment and growth across the economy is essential. When we talk about moderate long-term rates, it's about anchoring our 2% inflation target, which helps households and businesses make confident, long-term decisions. Stable prices are crucial for sustaining a labor market where everyone who wants to work can find a job, without sparking runaway inflation. And of course, our goal of maximum employment means striving for a labor market that's as inclusive and robust as possible. These three goals, moderate long-term rates, stable prices, and maximum employment, are all part of one unified mission, working together to promote a healthy, resilient economy. Let's talk about interest rate decisions and how they set the course for the economy. When central banks decide to change interest rates, it's a powerful tool that influences borrowing, spending, and investment across the board. These decisions are often based on current economic conditions, whether growth is slowing down, inflation is rising, or other factors. By raising interest rates, the goal might be to cool down inflation or prevent the economy from overheating. Conversely, lowering rates can stimulate economic activity, encouraging businesses and consumers to borrow and spend more. Throughout this presentation, we've seen how these rate decisions are not made in isolation. They're part of a broader strategy to guide the economy toward stability and growth. The key is understanding that interest rate changes act as a signal, shaping expectations and behaviors across markets. So, as we move forward, keep in mind how these decisions set the tone for economic policy and influence the overall financial environment. They are crucial in steering the course of economic health and stability. Let's talk about the key tools the Fed uses to influence the economy. First, reserve requirements are the minimum reserves banks must hold, which helps ensure they have enough funds to meet withdrawal demands. Next, the discount rate is the rate charged to banks when they borrow directly from the Fed. By adjusting this rate, the Fed can make borrowing more or less expensive for banks, influencing their lending activities. Then we have open market operations, which involve buying and selling government securities. These transactions are a powerful way for the Fed to inject or withdraw liquidity from the banking system. When the Fed buys securities, it increases the money supply, and when it sells securities, it reduces it. Most importantly, these movements in interest rates, especially the federal funds rate, ripple through the entire economy. They affect everything from mortgages and auto loans to credit cards and business loans. Now, why does this matter? The federal funds rate is the target interest rate at which commercial banks lend reserves to each other overnight. It's the Fed's most direct tool for influencing economic activity because changes here quickly influence borrowing costs across the economy. So, what exactly is the federal funds rate? It's the Fed's primary tool for setting monetary policy. By adjusting this rate, the Fed can help control inflation, promote employment, and stabilize the economy overall. Together, these three tools form a corridor that keeps the federal funds rate precisely within the FOMC's target range. This setup gives the Federal Reserve reliable control over short-term borrowing costs across the entire financial system. First, we have the overnight RRP, which provides a risk-free facility to set a rate floor. By offering a safe place to park excess reserves at a certain rate, it helps prevent the market rate from falling too low. Next is the interest on reserves, which acts as a sort of effective rate ceiling. Paying banks interest on their reserves encourages them not to lend below that rate, helping keep the rate from rising too high. Finally, the Fed uses open market operations, buying or selling treasuries, to adjust the overall money supply. When the Fed buys securities, it increases reserves and can lower rates. Selling securities does the opposite. Altogether, these tools create a corridor, kind of like a price range. That keeps the federal funds rate within the target zone, ensuring the Fed has reliable control over short-term interest rates. The New York Fed plays a crucial role in our financial system by executing open market operations every day on behalf of the FOMC. These operations are how the Fed manages the supply of reserves in the banking system. Banks that have excess reserves, meaning they hold more than they need, lend those reserves overnight to other banks that might need a little extra liquidity. This is a key part of how the federal funds market functions. The Fed influences this market by adjusting the total supply of reserves through its open market operations. When they buy or sell securities, they can increase or decrease the amount of reserves available, which in turn affects the interest rates in this market. The goal is to keep these rates within the target band set by the FOMC, supporting our broader monetary policy objectives. So, in essence, the Fed is steering the money flow in this market, money in motion, by carefully managing reserve levels to ensure stable and predictable interest rates. This process is fundamental to how the Fed implements its policy and maintains economic stability. When businesses and households trust that inflation will stay near 2%, they tend to make better decisions about saving, borrowing, and wages. This trust helps create a self-reinforcing cycle of stability, which is crucial for a healthy economy. Now, you might wonder why the Federal Open Market Committee, or FOMC, considers 2% annual inflation to be the ideal target. They believe that measuring inflation by the PCE price index at this level best balances their dual mandate, preserving consumers' purchasing power while also preventing deflation. So, why exactly 2%? Well, this inflation target acts as a cornerstone of economic stability. It's high enough to avoid the risks of deflation, which can slow economic growth, but low enough to protect the value of money for consumers and businesses alike. This balance helps maintain confidence in the economy and supports sustainable growth over time. Let's take a closer look at how policy influences the economy, and one of the most interesting concepts here is the ripple effect. When a government implements a new policy, whether it's a change in taxes, spending, or regulation, its impact doesn't just stay in one place. Instead, it sets off a chain reaction that spreads throughout the economy. For example, a tax cut might increase consumers' disposable income, leading to more spending. That in turn can boost business revenues, encouraging investment and potentially creating new jobs. But the ripple effect can also work in the opposite direction. Stricter regulations might increase costs for businesses, which could slow down hiring or investment. The key takeaway is that policies shape economic behavior in a cascading way, influencing everything from individual households to large corporations. Understanding this ripple effect helps us see the bigger picture of how government decisions can have far-reaching consequences across the entire economy. Let's take a closer look at how rate changes influence the dollar's value. When the dollar gets stronger, it becomes cheaper to buy imports from other countries. But at the same time, U.S. exports tend to become more expensive for foreign buyers. This dynamic can significantly impact our trade balance and also influence inflation, especially when it comes from imported goods. Moving on to the exchange rate channel, monetary policy plays a crucial role here. When the Federal Reserve tightens policy, it usually means higher interest rates, which can lead to a stronger dollar. Conversely, easier or looser policy tends to lower interest rates and can weaken the dollar. This change affects both the cost and the availability of credit. Tightening policies make borrowing more expensive and harder to get, while easier policies expand access to credit for households and businesses. Next, let's consider the credit channel. Policy shifts don't just impact currency values, they also influence stock and bond prices. When asset prices rise, households feel wealthier and businesses gain confidence, encouraging them to spend more and invest in growth. This boost in consumption and investment can have a positive ripple effect throughout the economy. Finally, there's the interest rate channel. Changes in the federal funds rate directly impact mortgage rates, auto loans, and business borrowing costs. These shifts influence how much households and firms are willing and able to borrow, spend, and invest. All of these pathways, exchange rates, credit, asset prices, and interest rates, are interconnected, and understanding them helps us see how monetary policy decisions ripple through the economy, shaping overall economic activity. Policy decisions don't affect the economy instantly. Instead, their impact typically unfolds over months or even years. That's why the Fed acts preemptively, based on forecasts of where the economy is headed, rather than just reacting to current data. It's a forward-looking approach aimed at guiding the economy smoothly. When we talk about the impacts on GDP, jobs, and inflation, we're referring to how these policy changes influence the broader economic outcomes. Changes in interest rates, for example, can alter borrowing, spending, and investing behaviors across the economy. Businesses and households respond to these shifts, adjusting their borrowing costs, asset holdings, credit availability, and foreign exchange positions. These responses set off a chain reaction that ultimately influences financial markets. Financial markets react to the policy rate decision itself and the guidance provided about future policies. These reactions can be seen in asset prices, exchange rates, and credit conditions. So, when the FOMC sets the rate, it's not just a standalone decision. It's a key step in translating policy intentions into real economic outcomes. This process from policy decision to actual economic impact is complex, but it's essential for understanding how the Fed manages the broader economy over time. The Fed carefully calibrates this balance. It's a delicate act. If they provide too much stimulus, there's a risk of overheating the economy and fueling inflation. On the other hand, if they pull back too much, it can lead to a slowdown or even a recession. When interest rates go up, borrowing becomes more expensive. That tends to slow down consumer spending because people are less likely to take out loans or use credit so freely. It also causes business investment to decline since borrowing costs are higher. As demand decreases, inflation pressures tend to cool off because there's less money chasing the same goods and services. So, higher rates generally lead to restraint in the economy. Conversely, when rates are lowered, borrowing becomes cheaper for consumers and businesses. This encourages increased spending and investment, which boosts demand. Higher demand then drives production, prompting firms to hire more workers to meet that increased activity. So, lower rates act as a stimulus, helping to support growth and employment. Overall, the Fed's choices on interest rates directly impact real GDP and jobs. It's all about balancing growth with inflation control. Economists estimate that it typically takes about 12 to 18 months for monetary policy changes to fully transmit to inflation and employment. This means that the Fed has to make decisions based on forecasts of where the economy is headed, not just on current conditions. This lag is important because it reminds us that monetary policy is a forward-looking tool. It takes time for the policy signals to ripple through the economy and produce the intended effects. No single channel dominates this process. Instead, the Fed's policy signal travels through multiple pathways in financial markets simultaneously. Each pathway reinforces the others, working together to influence real economic outcomes like growth, employment, and inflation. Think of it as a network of channels, all contributing to the overall impact. This interconnectedness underscores the complexity of policy transmission. So, when we talk about policy transmission at a glance, it's about understanding that multiple pathways work together, with a time lag, to guide the economy toward the Fed's goals. This highlights the importance of patience and foresight in monetary policy decision-making. Let's talk about navigating crises and the extraordinary measures that often become necessary. When organizations face unexpected challenges, they need to act quickly and decisively. This is where extraordinary measures come into play, steps that might go beyond the usual procedures to stabilize the situation. In Chapter 4, we focus on how these measures are not just reactive but strategic, helping organizations manage risks effectively. It's important to understand that during crises, communication, flexibility, and swift decision-making are key. These measures, while sometimes drastic, can be crucial for survival and future resilience. So, as we move forward, keep in mind that navigating crises successfully often depends on our ability to adapt and implement extraordinary strategies when circumstances demand it. Now, let's talk about some special facilities created under Section 13(3) to provide liquidity during unusual and urgent circumstances. These tools are designed to help financial institutions and markets when normal conditions are disrupted. First, we have emergency lending. This involves the Fed providing short-term loans to support financial stability, especially when markets are under stress. It's a way to ensure that liquidity is available when it's needed most. Next, we have forward guidance. This is essentially the Fed's way of communicating its future plans regarding interest rates. By clearly signaling where rates are headed, the Fed helps anchor market expectations and can even stimulate economic activity without actually changing rates immediately. Then there's quantitative easing, or QE. This is a more large-scale approach where the Fed buys large quantities of Treasury securities and mortgage-backed securities. The goal here is to lower long-term interest rates and inject liquidity into the financial system, encouraging borrowing and investment. Finally, we see that in times of severe economic stress, when cutting the federal funds rate to zero isn't enough, the Fed turns to these unconventional tools. These measures go beyond traditional policy and are crucial for supporting the economy during extraordinary circumstances. Connecting all these points, it's clear that the Fed has a range of powerful tools at its disposal to maintain stability and support economic growth, especially when faced with crises. When the Fed holds longer-term securities, it effectively pushes down long-term yields. This provides additional stimulus, especially when short-term rates are already near zero. It's a way to encourage borrowing and investment over a longer horizon. Now let's talk about the goal of these actions. When the Fed purchases assets through quantitative easing, or QE, it credits banks' reserves. Think of it as creating new money out of thin air. This process dramatically expands the Fed's balance sheet. Before the 2008 financial crisis, the Fed's balance sheet was under $1 trillion. But by 2022, it had grown to over $9 trillion. That's a huge increase. It shows just how much the Fed has used QE as a tool to support the economy. So, how does QE actually expand the balance sheet? When the Fed buys assets, it pays for them by adding reserves to banks. This increases the total assets on the Fed's books while also increasing bank reserves, another form of money. It's a powerful way to influence liquidity and overall financial conditions. Finally, this expansion of the Fed's balance sheet is a key part of its overall strategy. It's a way to provide economic stimulus, especially during times of crisis, by making money more available and lowering yields across the board. Each major crisis has historically triggered a significant expansion of the Federal Reserve's balance sheet. When we look back at the 2008 financial crisis, for example, the Fed launched quantitative easing programs that vastly increased its asset holdings. And more recently, during the COVID-19 pandemic, these measures were even more aggressive. In fact, the scale of the QE programs during COVID-19 completely dwarfed all previous interventions combined. This rapid expansion reflects how the Fed responds to extraordinary economic shocks by stepping in decisively to support financial markets and stabilize the economy. It's a clear demonstration of how the tools of monetary policy evolve in times of crisis, often leading to unprecedented levels of intervention to maintain economic stability. Let's take a look at some of the recent extraordinary actions by the Federal Reserve. Starting with the most recent, in the 2022 to 2023 period, we saw the fastest rate hiking cycle in 40 years. Interest rates jumped from nearly 0% all the way up to a range of 5.25 to 5.5%. This was a significant effort to combat inflation. Alongside this, the Fed began reducing its balance sheet through a process called quantitative tightening, or QT, which essentially means shrinking the assets it holds. Moving back to 2022-2023, in response to inflation concerns, the Fed made some drastic moves. They cut rates back down to between 0 and 0.25% in just 2 emergency meetings, highlighting how urgent the situation was. At the same time, they announced unlimited quantitative easing, or QE, to support the economy. Within weeks, over 9 emergency lending facilities were activated to provide liquidity and stabilize markets. Looking further back, during the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020, the Fed extended its asset purchase programs, called QE2 and QE3, to keep financial markets functioning smoothly. They also introduced forward guidance, which is essentially communicating their future policy intentions to help manage market expectations and reduce uncertainty during those turbulent times. Between 2010 and 2014, during the recovery from the financial crisis, the Fed kept interest rates near zero and launched what is known as QE1, purchasing about $1.75 trillion in assets. They also created emergency lending facilities to support the financial system and ensure liquidity. Finally, during the 2008-2009 financial crisis, the Fed took unprecedented steps. These actions included large-scale asset purchases and emergency programs designed to stabilize the economy. These extraordinary measures were crucial in preventing a total collapse of the financial system and laid the groundwork for the subsequent recovery. Throughout these periods, we see a pattern. When faced with economic crises or shocks, the Fed responds with bold, unconventional tools, either lowering rates to stimulate growth or raising them to fight inflation, often using asset purchases or sales to influence liquidity. These actions are core to understanding how the Fed navigates economic turbulence and supports the overall financial stability. Let's talk about accountability and transparency. These are crucial principles that underpin trust and integrity in any organization. When we focus on accountability, we're emphasizing the importance of taking responsibility for our actions and decisions. It means that everyone, from leadership to staff, is answerable for their roles. Transparency, on the other hand, involves openly sharing information and processes so that stakeholders can see what's happening and understand why decisions are made. Together, these principles foster a culture of honesty and openness, which is essential for building confidence both internally and externally. In the context of our overall theme, accountability and transparency are the foundation for sustainable and ethical practices that support long-term success. Let's take a closer look at some of the key tools and processes the Federal Reserve uses to communicate and maintain transparency. First, we have the quarterly summary of economic projections, often called the dot plot. This visual helps us see where Fed policymakers stand on interest rates and economic growth forecasts over the upcoming year. Next, we have the published meeting minutes, which come out about 3 weeks after each Federal Open Market Committee meeting. These minutes provide detailed insights into the discussions and reasoning behind our policy decisions, giving the public and markets a clearer picture of our thinking. We also have Fed chair press conferences, which are important opportunities for the chair to explain policy decisions directly to the public, answer questions, and clarify any uncertainties. Alongside that, post-meeting FOMC statements summarize the decision and the economic outlook, helping to reinforce transparency and consistency. Another key aspect is the use of public transparency tools, which include all these channels and more, aimed at making our decision-making process accessible and understandable. Now, an important point to remember is that the Fed chair testifies before Congress twice a year, delivering the Monetary Policy Report. This requirement, under the Humphrey-Hawkins Act, ensures congressional oversight and accountability. While we operate within a framework of democratic oversight, it's crucial to highlight that the Fed maintains day-to-day independence. This independence allows us to make decisions based solely on economic data and best practices, free from political influence. In summary, these tools and processes, ranging from projections and minutes to congressional testimony, are all about maintaining transparency, accountability, and trust, which are vital for effective monetary policy and overall economic stability. Every policy decision the Fed makes is always shared with the public through an official statement. These statements are released at the same time to both markets and the public, ensuring everyone has equal access to the information. This transparency is a key part of how the Fed communicates. One important tool they use is the dot plot. This chart shows where each FOMC member expects interest rates to move in the future. It gives markets a clear signal about the Fed's outlook and policy path, helping everyone understand the possible directions for future rate changes. In addition, the chair holds post-meeting press conferences. These are a great opportunity to provide context for the decision, explain the thinking behind it, and answer questions from journalists around the world. This direct communication helps clarify complex policy decisions and keeps markets well informed. All of these elements, the official statements, the dot plot, and press conferences, together make up the Fed's public communication ecosystem. This ecosystem is essential for maintaining transparency, managing expectations, and strengthening trust with the public and markets alike. It's a vital part of how the Fed ensures its policies are understood and effectively communicated. Now, let's take a look at some of the key tools the Federal Reserve uses during times of crisis. These include QE, or quantitative easing, forward guidance, and emergency lending. Each of these tools helps us respond to economic challenges in different ways. The overall process starts with our rates, which influence credit availability, which in turn affects spending. When people and businesses spend more, it drives up GDP and creates jobs. This is how the transmission mechanism works. Rates affect credit, which affects spending, and ultimately impacts economic growth and employment. The Federal Reserve primarily influences the economy through the federal funds rate, which we adjust using open market operations. This rate is a powerful tool because it sets the tone for borrowing costs across the economy. Our main goal, or our primary tool, is to promote maximum employment and stable prices, what we call our dual mandate. This means we're always balancing these two objectives to keep the economy healthy and resilient. The Federal Reserve continuously monitors the economic environment, adjusting our tools as needed. Our mission is to support a strong economy by fostering employment and price stability, which are the twin pillars of long-term growth. In conclusion, our ongoing mission is to adapt and respond to economic conditions, ensuring that we promote a resilient economy that benefits all Americans.